Thank you.
House Joint Resolution 641, designating January 30th in 2016 and in each succeeding year as Fred Korematsu Day of Civil Liberties and the Constitution in Virginia. Report for the Committee on Rules.
Gentleman from Fairfax, Mr. Keam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I'm sure you're wondering who Fred Korematsu is. But for me to explain to you who Fred Korematsu is, let me just take a couple of seconds to tell you about a moment in our history that is worth remembering. December 7th, 1941, we all know as a day of infamy. That was a day not only tragic because the enemy attacked us at Pearl Harbor and forced our nation into war in the Pacific as well as in Europe, but it was also a day that started within the United States a new trend, a new idea that perhaps there may be enemies within. And so the government began taking steps that were much more aggressive than we would have expected by starting to see if there might be people within the United States that might be disloyal to this nation. Unfortunately, for about 120,000 Americans born and raised in the United States who happen to have Japanese ancestry, they were the first targets of World War II. And so the United States government, through its military and the president's executive order, rounded up and put away in concentration camps 120,000 people of American citizens for no other crime than the fact that they might have ethnically looked like one of the enemies in our nation. And so from 1940s until the 1980s, this wrong was never redressed. Fred Korematsu was a young man who was a Japanese-American born and raised in California who disobeyed that order. He said, this is wrong. I'm not going to go and be locked up because my government is telling me to get locked up. And of course, he was tried, convicted of a criminal offense, and was put away. And after the war, he decided not to pursue the case because the war was over. It wasn't until 1983 that his criminal conviction was overturned by some pro bono lawyers, which led to U.S. Congress, 40 years after the war, apologizing to the United States people who happen to be of Japanese ancestry and passing the Civil Liberties Act, which President Reagan signed in 1988. As a result of that, the Supreme Court of the United States, to this day, still recognizes the Korematsu cases as valid law, although, of course, there hasn't been a case since then that would overturn that. But for Mr. Korematsu, his personal conviction was overturned by a lower-level court. So even though Mr. Korematsu passed away about 10 years ago, we want to make sure that our younger generation understand and appreciate this history, and that we teach each other so that we may never again let government over-regulation, oversight, and overpower our civil liberties and rights. And so starting next year, not this Friday, but next year, January 30th, we would hope that Virginia will recognize January 30th as Fred Korematsu Civil Liberties and Constitution Day. And I move that we adopt the resolution.